A lonely waitress offered food to a silent boy who appeared in her cafe every morning, expecting nothing in return. Months later, the arrival of Navy officers revealed the boy's identity and the profound impact of her quiet kindness. A story that would echo far beyond the cafe walls. Eliza Moreau was 31 years old, a waitress at the Harborview Cafe, a modest establishment squeezed between a fishing tackle shop and an old bookstore in the coastal town of Port Blossom, Maine. Her life was a predictable cycle, often as grey as the North Atlantic itself. Wake before the sun even thought of rising, walk 4 fog-damp blocks to work, tie her faded sea-green apron around her waist, and greet the first customers, rough fishermen with calloused hands and weary dockworkers with tired gazes. With a professional smile that rarely reached her eyes and never revealed the persistent loneliness dwelling behind it. She lived alone, in a small one-bedroom apartment above the old Sea Scrolls bookstore, with a window overlooking moss-covered rooftops and the noisy ballet of gulls over the harbour. Her only family were echoes in photographs yellowed by time and sea air. Her mother had succumbed to a long illness when Eliza was just 16. Her father, a merchant mariner whose face she barely recalled except from photos, was lost at sea during a storm 3 years later. The elderly grandmother who raised her with firm but gentle hands had moved to Florida's drier climate years ago due to chronic respiratory issues, leaving Eliza with little more than sporadic holiday phone calls and occasional postcards featuring palm trees and flamingos that seemed to belong to another planet. On a particularly grey Wednesday in late September, when the morning fog hung thick over the docked boats, Eliza noticed the boy for the first time. He didn't look older than 10, or 11, perhaps younger. He was thin and small for his age, with a tense posture and strikingly observant dark eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the cafe while remaining unreadable, guarding their own secrets. He sat in the booth farthest from the entrance, the one nearest the window overlooking the slow movement of the harbour. A heavy-looking, visibly worn backpack propped on the seat beside him, and a large hardcover sketchbook always open on the formica table. The first time she saw him, he asked, "Only for a glass of ice water?" his voice low and hesitant. Eliza brought it with a professional smile and a striped paper straw. He thanked her with an almost imperceptible nod, his eyes quickly darting to the movement of fishing boats heading out to sea. The second day, the same. Ice water, open sketchbook, silence. The third, the fourth. Always the same quiet routine, the same water, the same sketchbook, the same intent observation of the outside world. By the second week, Eliza had deciphered his pattern with the precision of someone watching the tides. He arrived punctually, at 7:30 a.m., exactly 1 hour before the bell at the local primary school. St. Brendan's by the Sea, 5 blocks away, announced the start of classes. He would sit, open his sketchbook and draw or just gaze out the window, watching with a silent, almost painful intensity as other customers, noisy tourists, local families, hurried workers, devoured steaming plates of lobster omelettes, the local specialty, thick slices of homemade toast, artisanal pork sausage and mountains of golden home fries. At 8:25 a.m. precisely, he would carefully close his sketchbook, stow it in his backpack, thank her again for the water with another minimal nod, and slip out, having eaten absolutely nothing. On the 16th day of his silent, hungry presence, on a morning when the biting New England autumn chill had set in and sea fog crept through the door cracks each time a customer entered, Eliza made an impulsive decision. She brought to his table a steaming bowl of the cafe's famous clam chowder, thick and creamy. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, setting the bowl down with a rehearsed air of mild confusion. "I think the kitchen made an extra portion for the lunch menu, by mistake. Instead of throwing it out, I'll just leave it here if you don't mind. Maybe it'll warm you up in this cold." The boy looked up from his sketchbook, and Eliza saw an explicit, painful battle waged in his dark eyes, the deep distrust of someone perhaps often deceived fighting against a raw, visceral hunger that seemed to originate from a place much deeper than just an empty stomach. "It's okay," Eliza reassured him with the softest, most non-threatening smile she could manage. "Sometimes the chef gets carried away with new recipes. Better someone enjoy it. Then it go to waste, right?" She moved away quickly, before he could protest or shame could stop him from accepting, watching discreetly from behind the stainless steel counter as he hesitated for a long moment, looking from the soup to the door, before finally picking up the spoon with a slightly trembling hand. When she returned to his table about 15 minutes later, ostensibly to clear other nearby tables, the bowl was impeccably clean, licked down to the last drop. The boy's eyes were fixed again on his sketchbook, a deliberate, almost defensive avoidance that tugged at Eliza's already accustomed to small aches heart. "Thank you," he whispered, as she collected the dish, his voice so low it was almost a thought. It became their unspoken ritual, a silent dance of need and discreet offering. Almost every morning, Eliza found a way, a plausible excuse, to bring the extra portion or the mistakenly prepared order the kitchen had coincidentally made. Clam chowder one day, a grilled cheese sandwich, and a small portion of fries. The next perhaps a large fluffy blueberry muffin or a cinnamon bun, when the mornings were a little brighter and less grey. The boy never asked for anything, never looked directly at the food until Eliza had moved away, never initiated conversation beyond that whispered, almost inaudible, "Thank you." But he ate every offered bite, sometimes with a speed and intensity that suggested a primal fear that this unexpected source of sustenance might disappear at any moment. "Who's the kid you keep feeding in the corner booth?" asked Mr. Henderson, an old retired fisherman with a face weathered by sun and wind, who occupied the same counter-stool every morning, mending his fishing nets with nimble fingers while drinking his strong, bitter coffee. "Never see his parents around. Seems like a ghost." "I don't know who he is, Mr. Henderson," Eliza admitted, wiping the counter with a damp cloth. "But I know he's hungry, and that's enough." Brenda, the burly, pragmatic cook who commanded the hot griddle and fryers with the brusque efficiency of a first mate, approached Eliza in the back near the noisy walk-in coolers after the third week of this silent arrangement. "You're feeding a stray bird, Eliza," she said, her tone not exactly unkind, but laden with the jaded realism of someone who'd seen too many good intentions go wrong in that harbor town. "You give handouts, they never learn real gratitude. He'll just disappear one day without a goodbye. They always do when the tide changes." Eliza didn't argue. She just shrugged, feeling the likely truth in Brenda's words, but also a quiet stubbornness surprising herself. "It's okay, Brenda. I've felt that kind of bone-deep hunger, too." It was the most personal, vulnerable thing she'd shared with any colleague in her 4 long years at the Harbour View Cafe. The boy never offered his name, and Eliza, sensing an almost palpable barrier of self-preservation and perhaps fear around him, never asked. Something in his demeanour, the careful, almost furtive way he entered and exited the cafe, how he always positioned himself in the booth to see both the front door and the street window simultaneously, told her instinctively that direct questions, however well-intentioned, would only frighten him away forever. Instead, she focused on small acts of silent care, ensuring his water glass was always full of ice and fresh water, that the soup, when it was soup, was always hot to warm him from the damp chill outside, and that the cafe felt, for those precious 55 minutes each morning, like a safe harbor, a place where he could breathe a little easier, lower his guard for an instant without being noticed too much, without being questioned. Sometimes in the quieter mid-morning moments when the boy was completely absorbed in his drawings, surprisingly detailed and skillful sketches of fishing boats, crashing waves, distant lighthouses, and seabirds in flight, Eliza allowed herself to watch and wonder. Did he live nearby, in one of the narrow streets behind the harbour? Did he have any family, anyone looking out for him? Why was he always so terribly alone, so vigilantly alert? And why did hunger, not just the physical kind the food temporarily eased, but a deeper hunger, a loneliness that emanated from him like the cold fog, seem such a constant, familiar companion? But she quickly pushed the thoughts away. In her own often harsh life experience, she'd learned that kindness with conditions, with the implicit expectation of answers or gratitude, wasn't truly kindness. It was a disguised transaction. So she continued their silent arrangement day after day, finding quiet, unexpected satisfaction in observing the small, almost imperceptible changes in him, the way his thin, perpetually tense shoulders gradually, began to relax a bit as he ate. The way his dark, fleeting gaze started to meet hers for a fraction of a second longer, maybe 2 or 3 whole seconds each time she approached his table. That tiny shift, that fleeting, growing moment of eye contact that was no longer just a reflex but perhaps a flicker of trust, was enough to convince Eliza that whatever she was doing, however small it might seem, mattered in some profound, fundamental way. By the 6th week of the morning ritual, it was inevitable that other customers and staff had noticed Eliza's consistent routine with the silent boy in the corner booth. Most said nothing, perhaps out of small-town indifference, perhaps out of tacit respect for privacy. But some, as always happens, couldn't resist commenting, their observations often tinged with the casual cruelty of those who have perhaps forgotten or never known what it means to desperately need help. "Doing your charity work on company time, Moreau?" asked a local real estate agent who frequented the cafe for late breakfasts, his oily tone suggesting he found the whole arrangement not just unwise, but somehow offensive to his sense of order. "All that generosity's going to come out of someone's pocket, you know. Kids these days expect everything handed to them." "No discipline," grumbled an elderly woman from a counter stool, who never tipped. "Times must be changing," observed another regular, a shopkeeper from Main Street. "In my day, nobody gave away free food just 'cause someone looked sad. Hard work was the only answer." Eliza heard these comments sometimes directly, sometimes as whispers behind her back, but she'd learned to let them slide off her like rain off a fisherman's slicker. Defending kindness to those already critical, she'd found, often only hardened their hearts further. So she just offered a vague smile and carried on. However, Mr. Davies, the cafe manager, a man with a permanently furrowed brow from worrying about profit margins and rising seafood costs, was not so easily ignored. He called Eliza into the small, cramped office behind the kitchen one morning, just after the boy had left, his expression more serious than usual under the flickering fluorescent light. "I've been watching you with that kid, Eliza," he said bluntly, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the worn Formica desk. "I know your heart's in the right place, but we can't have employees giving away free meals regularly. It's bad for business, sets a dangerous precedent. Others might start expecting the same." Eliza felt her hands sweat inside her apron, twisting the fabric nervously. "I understand, Mr. Davies. I'm sorry if I caused trouble. I'll cover the cost myself." Mr. Davies's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. "From your wages?" "Eliza, with all due respect, your tips and wages barely cover your rent and bills." "It's my choice," Eliza replied, something unexpectedly resolute in her usually quiet voice that made Mr. Davies study her more carefully for a moment. "It's just one meal a day, a soup, a sandwich. I can manage." After a tense moment of silence, where Eliza held her breath expecting the worst, Mr. Davies let out a long, resigned sigh. "All right, Eliza, against my better judgment. But listen closely. If this affects your work in any way, if you're late, if other tables complain, or if that kid causes any kind of trouble in here, it stops immediately. Understood?" Eliza nodded quickly, a tense but profound relief washing over her. She had anticipated a severe reprimand, perhaps even the threat of dismissal. This difficult compromise she could accept. And so every morning, she meticulously set aside a portion of her meager tips, money that might have gone to fix the persistent leak in her ceiling, or for the pair of waterproof boots her aching feet needed for the foggy walks, or perhaps for the dentist appointment she'd been postponing for over a year, and discreetly paid Mr. Davies for the estimated cost of the boy's meal. It was a small but constant sacrifice, unnoticed by everyone except herself and perhaps the manager, who now watched her with a mixture of exasperation and reluctant respect. On a particularly stormy Thursday in November, with the wind howling fiercely off the sea and rain lashing against the cafe windows, making the inside cozy, but the outside menacing, the boy didn't show up at his usual time. Eliza found herself glancing at the door every few minutes, an uneasy feeling growing in her stomach, a worry stronger than just a broken routine. The time passed, 7:45, 8:15, and the corner booth remained empty. Even so, she prepared, his bowl of clam chowder anyway, extra hot, and placed it at his empty table with a spoon beside it, just out of habit or perhaps hope. "Waste of good chowder," Brenda muttered, as she passed the empty booth on her way to the kitchen, shaking her head with her usual lack of sentimentality. By the end of the shift, the untouched bowl, now cold, seemed a silent rebuke to Eliza's stubbornness. Unable to simply throw it away, Eliza packed the cold soup and took it home that night, eating it cold for dinner, the creamy taste mixed with an inexplicable sense of loss. The boy didn't appear the next day, Friday, nor on Saturday. A full week passed with no sign of him, and Eliza began to wonder with an ache in her heart if Brenda hadn't been right after all. Had he simply moved on, disappeared into the fog like so many others in that transient harbor town? Had he found somewhere else, someone else, or simply given up? The thought left her with an uncomfortable emptiness, a hollow ache she couldn't quite name or explain. She knew nothing about him, not his name, not his story, yet his sudden, unexplained absence felt significant, like a small light extinguished in her monotonous days. "Told you," Brenda said on the 10th day of his absence, while cleaning the grill at the end of the shift. Her tone wasn't triumphant, just the weary confirmation of someone whose pessimism had once again been validated by life. They never stick around when the free ride ends or things get tough. It's their nature. During this period of absence and uncertainty, Eliza noticed a customer, a middle-aged man she'd never seen before, discreetly taking photos with his phone. Go of the empty booth where she, out of stubbornness or foolish hope, still occasionally left a glass of water or a roll, just in case. The next day, Brenda, with an expression mixing pity and a barely concealed "I told you so," showed Eliza her phone, a local Facebook group, known for its gossip and harsh comments about Port Blossom residents, had shared the images of the empty booth with a sarcastic caption: "The Harbour View Cafe, now serving imaginary charity cases. Did the charitable waitress forget to tell her protégé the free meal ticket expired?" The comments below the post were even worse, an avalanche of cynicism and anonymous cruelty. Clearly a cheap publicity stunt. Bet they claim the food goes to needy kids while throwing it away. Feeding strays just creates dependency. That waitress needs a reality check. Warning: next time a strange kid approaches you, remember this story. You're probably being set up for something. Eliza had never considered herself particularly vulnerable to others' opinions. Life had taught her to build a protective shell, but the calculated public cruelty of these comments stung unexpectedly. That night, alone in her damp apartment, with the sound of rain and wind outside, she sat on the edge of her bed and questioned her actions seriously for the first time. Was she foolish to help someone so consistently, without knowing anything about them? Was she projecting her own past onto a situation she didn't understand? Had Brenda been right all along? Seeking comfort, she opened the small, worn cedar box, where she kept her few truly precious possessions. Inside lay a faded photograph of her father, in his merchant marine uniform, a broad smile on his tanned face despite the grey industrial port backdrop. Beside it was a crumpled, salt-stained letter he'd sent her from a distant Asian port, shortly before his last voyage. Eliza carefully unfolded the fragile paper and read a passage she knew by heart, words that always brought her a strange sense. "Of peace. Shared my bread and some of my tinned stew with a thin boy on the docks today. The mate said I was a fool, that these street kids only learn to steal. Maybe he's right. But his eyes when he ate, Eliza, they were like mine when your grandmother shared the last piece of fish with us in those hard winters after Grandpa was gone. Nobody grows poor by sharing bread, daughter. But those who forget how to share remain hungry inside, no matter how full their plates or pockets. Remember that." Eliza traced her finger over her father's faded handwriting, a sudden clarity washing over her doubt and hurt. She didn't need to know the boy's name or story to recognize hunger, the physical hunger in his thin frame, the hunger for safety in his watchful eyes, the hunger for a moment of peace in his tense posture. And hunger, whatever its form, asked for bread or soup or a warm place to sit for an hour, not questions or judgments. Nobody on Facebook knew the boy's name. Nobody in town seemed to care about his face or absence, But all those mornings, for a brief time, someone hadn't been hungry. And maybe, just maybe, that mattered more than all the cynical opinions in the world. On the morning of the boys' 23rd consecutive absence, a clear, cold Tuesday, Eliza arrived at the cafe with realistic expectations, meaning almost none. The habit of looking toward the door around 7:30 a.m. remained, a conditioned reflex, but the sharp anticipation had dulled to quiet resignation. Still, out of a habit she couldn't quite break, she prepared a small bowl of leftover clam chowder. There was always some, and placed it discreetly at his usual booth with a clean spoon beside it. Just in case, she murmured to herself. At 9:17 a.m., when the cafe was moderately busy with the mid-morning crowd, everything changed. The first sign was the sudden, almost unnatural silence that fell over the usual cafe buzz. Eliza, refilling. Sugar dispensers near the window looked up, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Then she saw why. 4 dark, immaculate sedans with tinted windows and official U.S. Navy plates pulled into the small, potholed parking lot. They moved with silent, choreographed precision, forming an imposing semicircle in front of the entrance. Customers stopped mid-conversation, forks paused halfway to mouths. Outside, pedestrians slowed to stare at the vehicles, and the uniformed men and women emerging, standing formally beside each door. From the lead sedan stepped a man whose bearing commanded attention even before his uniform did. Tall, with the weathered face of someone who had seen too much sun and too little peace, he wore the dress uniform of a Navy captain, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons and medals that glinted in the morning light. He scanned the modest facade of the Harbour View Cafe for a moment, before walking purposefully toward the entrance, flanked by 2 younger officers, a lieutenant and an ensign. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, the sound abnormally loud in the expectant silence. Mr. Davies hurried out from his small office, nervously straightening his tie. "Can I help you, gentlemen, ma'am?" he asked, his voice higher than usual, clearly intimidated by the formal military presence. The captain removed his white cover, tucking it respectfully under his arm. "Good morning, I'm looking for someone who works here. A woman named Eliza Moreau." The silence in the cafe became so profound, Eliza could hear the low hum of the beverage, cooler behind the counter. All eyes, customers, staff, the military personnel themselves, turned toward her as she stepped forward, still holding a small glass sugar dispenser. "I'm Eliza," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden dryness in her throat and the pounding in her chest. The captain's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at her. "Miss Moreau?" She nodded, setting the dispenser down before her trembling hands could betray her anxiety. "My name is Captain Robert Miller, United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare Command." His voice was calm, professional, but held a quiet authority. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a crisp, official-looking envelope. "I'm here today because of a promise made to one of my finest men." He extended the envelope toward her. "This is a letter from the Admiral commanding Naval Special Warfare Operations, and I also have a personal message to deliver. From Leo's father." "Leo," Eliza repeated the name, sounding strange yet familiar. "The boy you've been feeding these past several months," Captain Miller explained gently. "Leo Sullivan. His father was Chief Petty Officer Michael Mike Sullivan, one of the most dedicated and respected sailors under my command. Was." The past tense landed like a physical weight on Eliza's shoulders. "I don't understand," she said, confusion and a sick premonition dawning. She still hadn't taken the envelope. "Is Leo okay?" "He's safe now," the captain assured her. "He's living with his maternal grandparents in Vermont. But for almost 3 months, Miss Moreau, he came here every morning before school, after his father was deployed on a classified long-term mission." The scattered pieces of the puzzle began to fall painfully into place for Eliza. The boy's palpable loneliness, his constant watchfulness, the hunger that seemed deeper than physical need, his reluctance to speak or trust. "What Chief Sullivan?" "I didn't know," the captain continued, his tone darkening slightly. "Was that shortly after his deployment his wife had left him. Worse, she abandoned Leo a few weeks later, simply disappearing. The boy, too proud, loyal to his father's heroic image, and terrified of being taken by social services and losing the only home he knew, told no one. He managed alone for weeks, using the small emergency fund his father had left, making the meals he knew how to prepare, sandwiches, cereal, stretch beyond imagination. A collective murmur of shock and sympathy rippled through the cafe. Eliza felt her heart constrict painfully as she imagined Leo, now with a name, with a tragic story, trying to survive alone in that empty house, waiting day after day for a father who, she now understood with sickening certainty, would never return. Chief Petty Officer Sullivan was lost at sea during a classified high-risk operation 2 months ago, Captain Miller said, his voice professional but not without restrained emotion. In his final encrypted communication, sent just before the final mission phase, he included a personal message. In it, he asked that if anything happened to him, we should find and personally thank the woman named Eliza at the cafe near the harbor, who was feeding Leo without asking questions. He opened the envelope Eliza still hadn't taken and removed not the official letter, but a handwritten note on faded paper. He wrote, "If I don't make it back, please find the person who has been giving my son breakfast." Leo mentioned her in his letters to me. He said she never asked why he was alone or made him feel ashamed for needing help. She just fed him day after day, expecting nothing. Tell her she didn't just feed a hungry child, she preserved the dignity of a sailor's son while he waited. Eliza finally accepted the paper with trembling hands, tears blurring her vision. The captain's voice seemed to come from far away as he continued. This message was read at Chief Sullivan's memorial service. When Leo finally told us about you, about your daily acts of quiet kindness, the entire Naval Special Warfare community made it our mission to find you and thank you in person. What you did, his voice caught briefly, what you did for the child of one of our own without even knowing who he was, that means something profound to all of us. The cafe had fallen completely silent. Even those who had mocked Eliza's actions sat motionless, faces reflecting shock and, in some cases, shame. Captain Miller straightened to his full height, snapped to attention, and rendered a formal salute, a gesture of profound respect rarely given to civilians. Behind him, every military person present did the same. On behalf of the United States, Navy, the Naval Special Warfare Command, the shipmates and mission teammates of Chief Petty Officer Sullivan, and most importantly, on behalf of Leo. Thank you, Miss Moreau. Eliza stood frozen, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her simple acts of kindness, bowls of soup and sandwiches, a glass of water, a smile without questions, had meant so much to a boy living through unimaginable circumstances, to a father fighting his last battles far from home. I didn't know, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I just couldn't let him go hungry. The captain nodded. Sometimes that's enough, Miss Moreau. Sometimes feeding a hungry child without asking why they're hungry is the greatest kindness of all. As if on cue, every military person in the room and every sailor standing outside by the vehicles saluted again in perfect unison. The customers in the cafe, moved by the ceremony unfolding before them, rose to their feet in silent respect. Eliza Moreau, the quiet waitress who had lived nearly invisibly for years, stood in the center of it all, clutching a father's last thank you in her hands, a woman whose small daily kindness had preserved not just a child's well-being, but a sailor's honor and peace of mind in his final days at sea. The week following the captain's visit transformed the Harbour View Cafe and the perception of Eliza in Port Blossom in ways no one could have predicted. The story spread through town like wildfire, jumping from conversation to social media to the local newspaper. The same Facebook group that had mocked Eliza's charity case now shared a heartfelt retelling of Chief Sullivan's message, gathering thousands of shares and supportive comments. Regular customers began requesting Eliza's section specifically. They left generous tips with notes of appreciation. Thank you for reminding us what matters, and my son is in the Navy. Your kindness gives me hope. Mr. Davies, who had initially begrudged Eliza's free soup, hung a small Navy flag beside the booth where Leo had sat. Beneath it he placed a discreet plaque, reserved for those who serve at sea and the families who wait ashore. The booth was never empty again, occupied by veterans, active duty personnel passing through town, and occasionally by families clearly struggling but treated with quiet dignity by the staff. On the 7th day after the captain's visit, a manila envelope arrived addressed to Eliza. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, the carefully formed letters betraying the youth of its author. Dear Miss Eliza, I didn't know your name until that day the captain came to find you, but every morning for those months, you were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. Dad always told me that real heroes don't wear capes. They wear the uniform. But I think sometimes they wear aprons too. When Dad stopped writing, I thought the world had forgotten both of us. But you remembered me every day, even when I couldn't. Tell you why I was alone. Grandma and Grandpa are nice, they're teaching me sailor knots, and Grandma makes good cookies. But I miss Dad, and sometimes I miss your clam chowder too. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't answer them. Your friend, Leo Sullivan P.S. I finished the sketchbook I was reading. It had a happy ending after all. Eliza framed the letter and hung it behind the counter, not prominently, not for show, but as a personal reminder of why small kindnesses matter. When customers asked about it, she would simply smile and say, "Just a thank you note from a special customer." Word of the diner's connection to naval special warfare spread throughout military communities. Sailors passing through town made detours to visit, often leaving unit coins or patches as tokens of appreciation. These too found their place on a small bulletin board behind the counter, a growing collage of gratitude from around the world. 3 months after the captain's visit, a school group came to the diner for lunch after a field trip. An 8-year-old girl with curious eyes studied Eliza as she refilled water glasses. "My mum says you're a hero," the child announced matter-of-factly. "Do you feel like one?" Eliza smiled, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be hungry, not just for food," the girl's teacher added quietly, having overheard the exchange. Eliza looked up, meeting the woman's understanding gaze with a nod. The teacher was right. Hunger came in many forms. Food was only the most obvious. As summer approached, the diner hosted a fundraiser for military families, raising enough to establish a small emergency fund for children of deployed parents. Mr. Davies surprisingly matched the donations personally, admitting to Eliza that her quiet persistence had changed something in him. "Never understood why my father was so adamant about feeding every stray kid in the neighborhood," he confessed. "Drove my mother crazy, but I think I get it now. Sometimes a meal is more than food." On a quiet Tuesday morning, almost exactly a year after Leo had first walked into the diner, Eliza arrived for her shift to find something small and metallic on her usual station, a challenge coin. The special token carried by military personnel, usually given only to those within their units, lay beside her order pad. One side bore the insignia of the Naval Special Warfare Command. The other had been custom engraved, Semper Custos, always vigilant. Eliza looked around the empty diner, searching for whoever might have left it. Finding no one, she stepped outside, scanning the street as the early morning breeze gently stirred, the Navy flag hanging above the entrance. No unusual cars were parked nearby, no waiting messengers, just the town waking up, sprinklers ticking on lawns, and the distant sound of the school bus making its first rounds. She slipped the coin into her pocket, its weight a comforting reminder that kindness offered without expectation sometimes returns in unexpected ways. That evening, as she hung her apron before heading home, Jenny noticed Mr. Davies placing a new sign in the diner's window. Simple but elegant, it read, "Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." When he caught her watching, he shrugged self-consciously. New policy? Figured it was time. Eliza smiled, understanding, the unspoken acknowledgement in his gesture. No grand speeches, no public declarations, just a quiet commitment to see the hunger in others and respond with what was needed most. Food without judgment, kindness without questions. As she walked home in the fading light, the challenge coin a solid presence in her pocket, Eliza thought about Leo, now growing up with his grandparents in Vermont, carrying his father's memory and, perhaps, she hoped the knowledge that even in one's darkest moments, kindness exists in unexpected places. Not everyone who helps needs recognition. Some people just need to know that today, someone isn't hungry. And that alone is enough to change a life.